My friends, I want to talk to you today about something that speaks to the deepest places of our hearts. We all have dreams. We all have desires. There are things we long for, things we work toward, things we believe will bring us happiness and fulfillment. Some of us dream of success, of financial security, of a life free from struggle. Others dream of love, of family, of a place to belong. Many dream of recognition, of making a name for themselves, of leaving a mark on this world. But what happens when our dreams don't come to pass? What happens when the path we have carefully laid out is suddenly blocked, when doors close, when opportunities vanish, when everything we hope for seems to crumble before our very eyes? It is in these moments that we must remember a truth that stands unshaken from the beginning of time. God's plans are always better than our dreams. We may think we know what we need. We may believe we have it all figured out, but God, in His infinite wisdom, sees beyond what we can see. He knows the end from the beginning. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the one who holds all things together, the one who knew us before we were even formed in our mother's womb. And He has a plan far greater, far higher, far more beautiful than anything we could ever imagine. Think for a moment about the story of Joseph in the Bible. Here was a young man who had dreams, literal dreams of greatness. He saw visions of his family bowing before him, of himself in a place of honor, and yet his journey was nothing like what he expected. He was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. Year after year, he suffered. Year after year, it seemed as though his dreams had been destroyed. But God was working. God was orchestrating something greater. And in the fullness of time, Joseph was lifted from the prison to the palace, raised up to a position of power in Egypt, not for his own glory, but to save many lives. What if Joseph had given up? What if he had let bitterness take root? What if he had rejected God's plan because it didn't match his dream? But he didn't. He trusted, he believed, and in the end, he saw that God's plan was far greater than anything he could have imagined. The same is true for you and me. We have all faced disappointments. We have all had moments where we cried out to God, why? Why is this happening? Why are you allowing this? But my friends, if we could see what God sees, if we could know what He knows, we would not fear. We would not doubt. We would not question His goodness, because He is not a God of chaos. He is not a God of confusion. He is a God of perfect order, of perfect love, of perfect wisdom. And He is working all things together for the good of those who love Him. Consider the words of Isaiah 55, 8 and 9, where the Lord declares, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." What a powerful reminder that our understanding is limited. We only see a small part of the picture, but God sees it all. He knows every detail of our past, our present, and our future. And His ways are higher. His ways are better. There are some of you today who are struggling. Some of you have been praying for a breakthrough, and it seems like nothing is happening. Some of you have been believing for a miracle, and you feel like God is silent. Some of you are carrying wounds from the past, disappointments that have left you weary and broken. And let me tell you today, He has not forgotten you. He is working even when you cannot see it. He is moving even when it feels like nothing is happening. The very thing that you think is a setback may be a setup for something far greater than you could ever dream. That closed door may be God's protection. That disappointment may be God's redirection. That painful season may be the very thing God is using to prepare you for a blessing beyond anything you have ever imagined. Look at the life of Moses. He had dreams of delivering his people, of making a difference, but in his own strength, he failed. He killed a man and fled into the wilderness. For 40 years, he lived in obscurity. Can you imagine how many times he must have wondered if his life had any purpose? And yet, in God's perfect timing, he called Moses from the burning bush and led him to fulfill the very purpose for which he was created. If Moses had clung to his own dreams, he might have missed the calling of God. But when he surrendered, when he obeyed, when he trusted, he walked into a destiny greater than anything he could have planned. The same is true for you. God is calling you to trust him. He is calling you to surrender your dreams, your plans, your desires at his feet. He is calling you to believe that he is good, even when life doesn't make sense. He is calling you to walk by faith and not by sight. And when you do, when you place your life fully in his hands, you will see his glory. You will see his faithfulness. You will see that what he has prepared for you is far greater than anything you could have ever dreamed. There will be moments of waiting. There will be seasons of testing. There will be times when you wonder if God is really in control. But let me remind you of this. God is never late. He is never caught off guard. He is never taken by surprise. His timing is perfect. His plans are flawless, and he will never fail you. Look at Jesus. The disciples had their own dreams of what the Messiah should be. They thought he would establish an earthly kingdom, overthrow their oppressors, bring immediate victory. But God's plan was so much greater. Instead of an earthly throne, Jesus took up a cross. Instead of temporary deliverance, he brought eternal salvation. Instead of a fleeting victory, he conquered death itself. And because of his obedience, because he submitted to the will of the Father, you and I have hope, we have life, we have the promise of eternity. My friends, do not be discouraged when life does not go as you plan. Do not lose heart when doors close. Do not give up when the road gets hard. Instead, trust in the one who holds your future. Trust in the one whose plans are far greater than anything you could ever dream. Trust in the God who loves you more than you can imagine, who is working all things together for your good, who will never leave you, never forsake you, never fail you. God's plans are always better than our dreams. Hold on to him. Walk in faith, and in his perfect time, you will see the goodness, the power, and the glory of his perfect plan unfold in your life. My friends, I want you to take a moment and think about the times in your life when things didn't go the way you expected. Maybe you had a dream you were certain was from God. You worked hard, you prayed, you believed, and yet nothing happened. Maybe you had plans for your career, for your family, for your future, and suddenly everything changed. The opportunity you were waiting for never came. The door you were knocking on stayed shut. The people you trusted let you down. And in that moment you wondered, God, where are you? Why aren't you answering my prayers? Why aren't you giving me the desires of my heart? But I want to tell you today that God is not ignoring you. He is not indifferent to your pain. He is not withholding blessings from you because he delights in your struggle. No, he is a loving Father. He is a God who cares deeply for his children. And sometimes in his great love, he does not give us what we want because he has something so much better in store. We see this truth over and over again in the Bible. Think about Abraham. God had promised him a son, a child through whom an entire nation would come. But years passed and still no child. Abraham and Sarah grew older and the promise seemed impossible, so they took matters into their own hands. They came up with their own plan. Sarah gave her servant Hagar to Abraham, and Ishmael was born. But Ishmael was not the child of promise. Ishmael was the result of human effort, of trying to make God's promise happen in their own way. And yet God had something far greater planned. In his perfect timing, Isaac was born, the child of promise, the fulfillment of God's word. If only Abraham and Sarah had trusted completely, if only they had waited patiently, they would have seen that God's plan was better all along. How often do we do the same? We get tired of waiting. We grow impatient. We try to force things to happen on our own. And in doing so, we settle for something far less than what God intended for us. We settle for Ishmael when God has an Isaac waiting for us. We settle for what is good when God wants to give us what is best. My friends, do not let impatience rob you of the fullness of God's plan. Do not let frustration lead you down a path that is outside of his will. Trust in him. Wait on him. His promises never fail. There are times when God's plan may seem confusing, times when we cannot understand why he is allowing certain things to happen, times when we feel lost, abandoned, unsure of the future. But let me remind you of this. God sees the whole picture. We only see a tiny part. It's like looking at the back of a tapestry where all the threads are tangled, where there seems to be no order, no design. But if we could turn it around, if we could see the front, we would see that God has been weaving something beautiful all along. Think about Ruth. She had a dream of a happy life with her husband, of a family, of security. But then tragedy struck. Her husband died. Her future became uncertain. Everything she had planned was suddenly gone. She had a choice. She could have given up. She could have gone back to her old life. But instead, she chose to trust God. She chose to follow Naomi to a land she did not know, to a future that was unclear. And because of her faithfulness, because she trusted God, even when she didn't understand, he led her to Boaz. He restored her life. He gave her a future far greater than she could have imagined. She became the great-grandmother of King David, part of the very lineage of Jesus Christ. If Ruth had clung to her own plans, she would have missed the incredible destiny God had for her. My friends, I wonder how many of us are holding on so tightly to our own plans that we are missing what God is trying to do in our lives. I wonder how many of us are so focused on what we think we want that we cannot see what God is preparing for us. What if the very thing you are fighting to hold on to is the thing God is asking you to let go of? What if he is asking you to surrender that dream, that relationship, that career, that plan, because he has something far greater in store? We see this truth in the life of Paul. Before he encountered Jesus, Paul had a dream. He was a Pharisee, a man of great knowledge and status. He believed he was serving God by persecuting Christians. He had his whole life planned out. But then on the road to Damascus, everything changed. Jesus appeared to him. Paul was blinded, knocked to the ground, and in that moment, he realized that everything he had been pursuing was meaningless compared to the calling of God. If Paul had continued in his own way, he would have missed the greatest mission of his life. But because he surrendered, because he laid down his own plans, God used him to spread the gospel across the world. He wrote much of the New Testament. His impact continues to this day. What about you? What are you holding on to that God is asking you to release? What dream, what plan, what expectation are you clinging to so tightly that you are not allowing God to move in your life? Surrender is not easy. It requires faith. It requires trust. But when we surrender, when we say, Lord, not my will, but yours be done, we step into the fullness of his purpose. And his purpose is always greater than anything we could ever dream. Maybe right now you feel like you're in the middle of the storm. Maybe you feel like your dreams have been shattered. Maybe you don't see a way forward. But let me tell you, my friends, God is not finished with you yet. He is still writing your story. He is still working behind the scenes. And what the enemy meant for evil, God will use for good. Look at Job. He lost everything. His wealth, his health, his family. He had every reason to give up. He had every reason to question God. But Job held on to his faith. He didn't understand, but he trusted. And in the end, God restored everything he had lost and more. Job's latter days were greater than his former days. What if Job had turned away? What if he had abandoned his faith? He would have missed the incredible blessing God had waiting for him. Some of you are in a season of loss. Some of you have faced setbacks, heartbreaks, disappointments. But I want you to hear this. Your story is not over. What seems like a dead end is just a new beginning in God's hands. He is the God of restoration. He is the God of redemption. He is the God who takes what is broken and makes it beautiful. So I challenge you today, trust him. Trust him even when you don't understand. Trust him when your plans fall apart. Trust him when the doors close. Trust him when the road is unclear. Because his plans are always better than your dream. Think about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He knew the suffering that awaited him. He knew the pain, the agony, the cross. And he prayed, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And because he submitted to the will of the Father, because he laid down his life, salvation was made possible for all of us. God's ways are higher. His plans are better. His timing is perfect. So today I urge you, let go of your fears. Let go of your doubts. Let go of your need to control. Place your life in the hands of the one who knows you, who loves you, who has a plan for you. And when you do, you will see that his plan is far greater than anything you could have ever dreamed. My friends, I want you to take a moment and think about how often we measure our lives by our own expectations. We make plans, we set goals, we envision our future the way we believe it should be. And when things don't go according to that vision, we feel disappointed, frustrated, and sometimes even abandoned by God. But I want to remind you today that his plans are not just different from ours. They are infinitely higher, wiser, and better. We often pray for open doors, for opportunities, for blessings. And when they don't come in the way we expect, we think something has gone wrong. But what if God is closing one door to lead you to a better one? What if he is redirecting your path because what you're asking for is far smaller than what he has in store for you? How many times have we pleaded with God for something, believing it to be the very best for us, only to look back later and thank him for not giving us what we asked for? The relationship that didn't work out, the job that slipped away, the opportunity that never materialized. What if those were God's way of protecting you from something that was never meant to be yours? I think about the Israelites in the wilderness. They had been freed from slavery in Egypt, and yet the moment they faced difficulties, they longed to return. They cried out to Moses, saying it would have been better to stay in Egypt. Their minds were still stuck in their own plans, their own limited understanding. They could not yet see the promised land. All they could see was the discomfort of the journey, but God had something far greater for them. He had a land flowing with milk and honey, a land of blessing and prosperity. But their impatience and doubt caused them to wander for 40 years. How many times do we do the same? How often do we hold on to our own expectations so tightly that we resist what God is trying to do in our lives? Sometimes God's plan includes a waiting season. That is one of the hardest things for us to accept. We live in a world that demands immediate results. We want instant success, instant answers, instant breakthroughs. But God is not in a hurry. He is far more concerned with preparing you for the blessing than simply giving you the blessing. If He gives you something before you're ready, it could destroy you. If He grants you success before you have the character to sustain it, it could lead you away from Him instead of drawing you closer. Think about David. He was anointed as king while he was still a shepherd boy, but he didn't step into his throne immediately. He went through years of trials, of hiding, of running for his life from King Saul. Why? Because God was shaping him. God was refining him. God was preparing him for the responsibility that lay ahead. If David had become king the moment he was anointed, he would not have been the leader God intended him to be. The wilderness season was necessary. The struggle was necessary. And in the end, David became the greatest king Israel had ever known. Maybe you're in a wilderness season right now. Maybe you feel like God has forgotten you. Maybe you've been waiting for a promise that seems delayed. But I want to tell you, God has not forgotten you. He is working behind the scenes in ways you cannot see. He is developing you, strengthening you, molding you into the person He has called you to be. Do not despise the waiting. Do not rush the process. God's timing is perfect. Think about the story of Lazarus. When Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, He did not rush to heal him. He delayed, and because of that delay, Lazarus died. Mary and Martha were heartbroken. They couldn't understand why Jesus didn't come sooner, but what they didn't realize was that Jesus had a greater plan. He didn't just want to heal Lazarus. He wanted to raise him from the dead. He wanted to show His power in a way that was beyond what they had imagined. Had Jesus come earlier, they would have seen a healing. But because He delayed, they witnessed a resurrection. Maybe you feel like God is delaying in your life. Maybe you've been asking for healing, for a breakthrough, for a miracle, and it hasn't come yet. But what if God is preparing something greater? What if He is setting the stage for something beyond what you've prayed for? God is never late. He is never behind schedule. He knows exactly what He is doing, and when the time is right, He will move in a way that will leave no doubt that it was His hand at work. We see this over and over again in the Bible. God's plan often looks different than what we expect. When the people of Israel were waiting for a Messiah, they envisioned a mighty warrior, a king who would overthrow their enemies and establish an earthly kingdom. But God's plan was different. Instead of a warrior, He sent a servant. Instead of a conqueror, He sent a savior. Instead of a throne, He gave him a cross. And because of that cross, because of Jesus' sacrifice, we have eternal life. God's plan was so much greater than anything they could have imagined. What about you? What expectations are you holding on to that God may be asking you to release? Are you willing to trust that His way is better, even when it doesn't make sense? Are you willing to surrender your dreams, your timeline, your plans, and say, Lord, have your way in my life? That is not an easy prayer to pray. It requires faith. It requires trust. It requires letting go of control. But when you do, when you fully place your life in God's hands, you will see his power move in ways you never imagined. God's plans are always for your good. That doesn't mean they will always be easy. That doesn't mean you won't face trials, disappointments, and struggles. But it does mean that he will use every single thing, the good, the bad, the painful, the confusing, for a greater purpose. Romans 8:28 tells us, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. That means even when it looks like everything is falling apart, God is still at work. Even when you don't understand, he is still moving. Even when the enemy tries to bring destruction into your life, God is turning it around for your good. Joseph told his brothers in Genesis 50:20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." What a powerful statement. The very thing that was meant to destroy Joseph, the betrayal, the slavery, the false accusations, the imprisonment, was the very thing God used to position him for his purpose. And the same is true for you. The hardships you have faced, the trials you have endured, the pain you have walked through, none of it has been wasted. God is using it. He is shaping you. He is preparing you. And when the time is right, he will lift you up. Do not lose heart. Do not give up. Do not let the enemy convince you that God has abandoned you. He has not. He is with you even now. And his plan for your life is so much greater than anything you could ever dream. Trust him. Surrender to him. Walk by faith, not by sight. And in his perfect time, you will see the fullness of his purpose revealed in your life. My friends, there is no safer place to be than in the center of God's will. There is no greater peace than knowing that your life is in his hands. There is no greater joy than walking in the plans he has prepared for you. You may not understand it all right now. You may have questions, uncertainties, and struggles. But one day you will look back and see that every step, every trial, every delay was leading you to something far greater than you ever imagined. There are moments in life when we stand at a crossroads, uncertain of which path to take. We have our own desires, our own dreams, our own carefully laid out plans, and yet, deep down, we feel a stirring in our spirit that tells us God is leading us in a different direction. That moment can be terrifying because it requires us to step out in faith, to release our grip on what we thought we wanted, and to trust in a plan we cannot yet see. But I want to tell you today that when you surrender to God's leading, when you yield to his will instead of clinging to your own, you step into the extraordinary. We serve a God who does not think in human limitations. We serve a God who calls things that are not as though they were. We serve a God who takes the weak and makes them strong, who takes the broken and makes them whole, who takes the ordinary and turns it into something miraculous. And when we trust him, when we say, "Lord, I may not understand, but I choose to follow you," we open ourselves up to a life that is greater than anything we could have built for ourselves. Look at Peter. He was a fisherman, an ordinary man going about his daily work when Jesus called him. He had no idea that his life was about to change forever. If Peter had clung to his fishing nets, if he had held on to his own plans, he would have missed the greatest adventure of his life. But because he said yes to Jesus, because he left behind what was familiar to follow the call, he became a witness to the greatest move of God in history. He walked on water. He preached to thousands. He became a pillar of the early church. That is what happens when we let go of our dreams and embrace God's plans. You may be facing a decision right now. You may be standing at the edge, unsure of what to do next. I want to encourage you. Take the step of faith. Trust that God is leading you to something greater. It may not look like what you expected. It may require sacrifice. It may even be uncomfortable. But I promise you, when you follow God, you will never regret it. His ways are perfect. His plans are good. And He will always lead you to the place where you are meant to be. My friends, if there is one thing I want you to take away today, it is this: God's plans are always better than our dreams. No matter how great our own vision may seem, no matter how much we think we know what's best, God sees what we cannot see. He knows the road ahead. He knows what will truly bring us joy, fulfillment, and purpose. And if we are willing to trust Him, if we are willing to surrender our plans and embrace His, we will step into something far greater than we ever imagined. So do not be discouraged when things don't go your way. Do not lose heart when doors close or when dreams seem delayed. God is working even in the waiting. He is preparing you, shaping you, and leading you towards something far beyond what you could ever ask or think. Trust Him. Follow Him. Hold on to His promises, because one day you will look back and see that every disappointment, every detour, every unanswered prayer was God's way of leading you to something greater. His plans are perfect. His timing is flawless, and His love for you never fails. Surrender to Him today, and you will see His plans are always better than your dreams.